if it happened again today, I would stroke out. So many baseball fans I know have heartwarming stories about how they fell for their favorite teams, a family saga, an iconic moment to which they bore accidental witness. For me, a key factor was color schemes. The Yankees were drab and gray. They radiated no fun. The Mets were orange and blue, and the NY on their caps sprouted soft round serifs like muffin tops. The Yankees logo was all sharp elbows, and didn't anyone else find it unsettling that their pinstripes looked like prison uniforms? Like they were playing for their lives? My parents both grew up in the Bronx, an irony I've always savored, but they split up when I was 6. By the time I fell for baseball, I was only seeing my father a few times a month, which was sad for my childhood, but a godsend for my baseball future because it liberated me to choose my own destiny. I can see clearly now that baseball, sports, was a balm for loneliness, a way to be in the company of men and learn codes and rituals and feel a part of a group, however vicariously. In the real world, I didn't know anything about men and didn't get to spend much time in their company. I learned about men from baseball. I learned, God help me, from the Mets. I'd like to think that the Mets chose me, in recognition of a kindred spirit, as much as I chose them. What really clinched it, though, wasn't my ardor for their day-glow colors, or my sense that I'd found my tribe. If I drew up a pie chart, those factors would take up about 25%. The other 75%, the number one overwhelming reason why I'm a Mets fan, is that I was 7 years old, and the Mets had a player named Strawberry. That's really all it took. The 1986 Mets had a warping effect on my psychology as a Mets fan, imbuing me with a capacity for endlessly self-replenishing optimism even when it was unwarranted by facts or logic. When I'd first fallen in love with baseball a few years earlier, the Mets were emerging from one of their most brutal stretches as a franchise, but I didn't know about any of that. I just knew they were bad. I'd heard Dave Kingman's name, and I was old enough to discern that everyone thought he was a prick. I'd watched the grainy footage they always showed during rain delays on WWOR of Casey Stengel in his inflatable Mets uniform doing his stand-up act. I knew about 1962, the worst team there ever was. I knew about 40 wins and 120 losses. But I was far too young to grasp how rare and special the Mets' 1986 season was. It had been 13 years since their last trip to the World Series in 1973, when they lost to the dynastic Oakland Athletics in 7 games, but I knew there were plenty of fan bases that had been waiting far longer, including some that had been waiting forever. Besides, for as long as I'd been watching baseball, the Mets had been good. My first 3 seasons as a fan just so happened to coincide with the Mets' first run of 3 consecutive 90-win seasons. As far as I was concerned, the 1989 season, when the Mets won just 87 games and finished second in the National League East, was a catastrophe. How naive I was. I've never shaken it. Almost 40 years now, I've been like this. Stupid, delusional, and I love it. It's so much more fun than being one of those long-suffering Red Sox fans who don't know what to do with themselves now that the Red Sox are the Yankees. But that 86 team was also the beginning of my true education as a Mets fan, and the first lesson I learned was that 1986 was the anomaly, the one and only time in Mets history when the Mets were the juggernaut. Only in retrospect had it become clear what a bunch of drunks and criminals and ticking time bombs so many of them were, and how inevitable it was that they'd blow apart in spectacular fashion. By the late 1980s, it was like watching the third act of Fargo, with Dwight Gooden vanishing and Kevin Mitchell shoving teammates into a wood chipper. I didn't have the wisdom to understand this at the time, but the World Series, the winning, the dominance, the champagne in the locker room, that wasn't the Metsy part of the 86 story. The Metsy part was everything that came next. Contrary to everything you've been told about the New York Mets, everything you thought you knew, contrary to what you must have expected when you picked up this book, this is not the story of a bad team. The Mets are not bad. Listen, they've been bad at times in the past. Let's call it more often than not, including the all-time record for being bad the most times in a single season. But badness is not what defines the Mets as a franchise. There is a difference between being bad and being gifted at losing, and this distinction holds the key to